All right, time to talk about integer multiplication and division. So let's start off by thinking about just what happens when we multiply two positive values. So here I have two groups of 3. So two groups of 3 on my number line. Let me zoom in a little bit. I'm going to start at 0, and then here's one group of 3 and another group of 3. I could make those hops a little better. One group of 3, two groups of 3. So this is 2 times 3, right? I have two groups of 3 here. And so now I could use that to write an equation. I could say 2 times 3 equals 6. So that's how I could represent that on a number line and with an expression and equation. But what if instead of having two groups of 3, I had two groups of -3? Well, that shouldn't really be any harder, right? I'm just going to be going the opposite direction, because instead of two groups of +3, I have two groups of -3. So here's one group of -3, and here's another group of -3. So two groups of -3. And that ends at -6. So two groups of -3 is equal to -6. Now this next one, it says -2 times -3, right? So essentially what it's saying is, what's the opposite of two groups of -3? What would the opposite of two groups of -3 be? Well, I know that two groups of -3 is -6, right? So the opposite of two groups of, so the opposite of two groups of -3 should be +6. Let's see if we can see this on the number line. So two groups of -3 would look like this, right? We just talked about that. But that's not actually what we want here. We don't want two groups of -3. We want -2 groups of -3. So we're not going to be going to the left. Instead, we're going to be doing just the opposite. We're going to be going to the right. So this is the opposite of one group of -3. And this is the opposite of two groups of -3. So -2 times -3 is equal to +6. We could also use this to think about division. If 2 times 3 is 6, then 6 divided by 3 must be 2. If 2 times -3 is -6, then -6 divided by -3 must be +2. And then if -2 times -3 is 6, then 6 divided by -3 must be -2. So let me color code this really quick. I'm just going to go through and highlight the signs of my numbers. So 2 times 3, a +2 times a +3, gave me a +6. On the bottom, -2 times -3 also gave me a +6. And then when my signs were different, when I had 2 times -3, then a +2 and a -3, then I got a -6. Let's check our division. Let's see, these are both negative. Here I have a negative product. Okay, and then these are, I missed a negative. That negative right there. Here's my positives. And so what I notice here, there are 4 instances where I have an answer that's positive, right? So a positive times a positive gave me a positive. A negative times a negative also gave me a positive. Here, a negative divided by a negative gave me a positive. And here, a positive divided by a positive gave me a positive, right? So when I am multiplying or dividing two values that have the same sign, my answer is positive. If I'm multiplying or dividing two values that have different signs, my answer seems to be negative. Let's see if we can formalize this thinking. So here were the first 3 multiplication facts we started with. 2 times 3, those are both positive, +6. -2 and -3, the product was still positive, it was a +6. And then here, -2 times +3 gave us a -6. So when the signs were different, we ended up with a negative product. And when the signs were the same, we ended up with positive products. Let's look at our division facts that we looked at. So a positive 6 divided by a positive 3 gives us a positive 2, and a negative 6 divided by a negative 3 gives us a positive 2. But when the signs are different, we get negatives. So a negative 6 divided by a positive 3 was a negative 2, and a negative 6 divided by a positive 2 was a negative 3. Whew, that's a lot to say. Let's look at it with a little bit of color coding here. When the signs are the same, my products and my quotients are all positive. When the signs are different, my products or my quotients are all negative. So let's generalize that in words now. So I am going to do some highlighting here and highlight that when I have different signs, I get a negative result. And when I have the same sign, I get a positive result. Of course, this is really only true for multiplication and division, right? We know that we have different rules and different patterns that we noticed when we were adding and subtracting.